Ooh. Yeah, that's the good stuff. Oh, I gotta get better at this. Hey guys, this is going to be continued from our introduction of the K, and I'm just making this video in case some of you maybe are absent this coming week before spring break, and you can watch this at home and catch up. Also, if you're over spring break, if you want to go back and review, you're welcome to use these videos to kind of keep the K fresh in your mind. So, what we're going to do is we're going to start off just at the beginning, because I only read like one page, and it'll just be a review of chapter 1. So we're reading the K. Remember, it takes place early 1940s during World War II, and it's pre-civil rights period. So of course we have racial tensions and misconceptions. So there's certain aspects of segregation, discrimination in this book that we will tackle as we read it and go along. So you'll see that I have Google Earth pulled up on this side of the screen over there. And I already have Curacao typed in, so we're just going to go to Curacao. We're going to zoom in so that we have a good idea where we're at. And you see that's in the Caribbean, not far from South America, specifically Venezuela. So if at any point you hear my baby monitor go off, it's because Noah is sleeping. Hopefully he'll sleep and let me finish this little lesson. So, all right, well, there's Curacao. So let's get started, and as we read, we'll take a look at some of the places mentioned in the book by Theodore Taylor. Okay. Like silent, hungry sharks that swim in the darkness of the sea, the German submarines arrived in the middle of the night. And remember, we've been discussing, this is World War II, and we've also discussed why German submarines would care about a little island in the Caribbean, because of the oil refineries. I was asleep on the second floor of our narrow, gabled green house in Willemstad, on the island of Curacao, the largest of the Dutch islands just off the coast of Venezuela. Now, when it says Dutch, that means that it's owned by the Netherlands, which is over in Europe, not far from Germany, actually. And during World War II, the Netherlands were actually captured by Germany. So that's an interesting little side story as well. It mentioned Willemstad. You can see here on Google Earth that Willemstad is this area here. You can see it there. So let's zoom in a little bit, and since we're in Willemstad, that's where we'll start out. There we go. Okay, so this is Willemstad, and you see it has a canal that goes to an inlet. This would be where ships would bring their cargo in and they'd unload. It's a big port there. Okay. Venezuela, of course, we'll zoom out just a bit so you can see that. And then we'll zoom back in. Okay, so there's Curacao. And here is Venezuela. Okay. And in just a minute, it's going to mention a place called, sorry about that, Lake Maracaibo. Pretty well-known lake in Venezuela. So and it's right here. Okay, so let's go back over here to Curacao, just over there. All right. I remember that on the moonless night in February 1942, they attacked the big Lago oil refinery on Aruba, the sister island west of us. Okay, west would be over to the left, and you can see Aruba right here. So the German submarines have already attacked a ship over in Aruba. Then they blew up 6 of our small lake tankers, the tubby ones that still bring crude oil from Lake Maracaibo, right here, Lake Maracaibo, to the refinery, Curacao Petroleum Machapage, to be made into gasoline, kerosene, and diesel oil. Okay, now crude oil is it's called crude because that's what it is basically. It is oil taken straight from the ground, so it has a lot of of dirt, has a lot of other things that they have to get out before it's usable. Okay, so that's Lake Maracaibo, and they bring that from Lake Maracaibo over to Curacao to the refinery. So let's go back. We'll go back to Willemstad now. Zoom in back in there. Okay. Now you can read this without Google Earth, but it really helps your understanding of it if you can get an idea of the setting. If you're a travel tracer in your group, make sure you're writing these places down. One German sub was even sighted off Willemstad at dawn. Okay, so now they've even got one out here somewhere in the Caribbean outside of Willemstad. So when I woke up, there was much excitement in the city, which looks like a part of Old Holland. Now Holland is another word for the Netherlands. Okay, and when it says excitement, it doesn't mean they're excited and happy. It means more that they were just excited and maybe freaking out a bit. So, except that all the houses are painted in soft colors, pinks and greens and blues, and there are no dikes. Dikes, of course, would be like a dam holding water back, much like New Orleans has, because the city's below sea level. The dikes keep the ocean back. So it was very hard to finish my breakfast because I wanted to go to Pontoon, the business district, the oldest part of town, and then to Fort Amsterdam, where I could look out to sea. If there was an enemy U-boat out there, I wanted to see it, join the people, and shaking a fist at it. Okay, so he's a young boy your age, well, much of your ages. So, and you know how you guys are. You're excited about stuff like that. You play Army games. It's just our culture. Boys grow up liking things like that. Some girls do as well. Some boys don't like it. But in his case, he was excited to see something about this, because war, they didn't really understand. It's just more of a fantasy thing. I was not frightened, just terribly excited. War was something I'd heard a lot about but had never seen. The whole world was at war. Why they call it World War II. And now it had come to us in the warm blue Caribbean. The first thing that my mother said was, "Philip, the enemy has finally attacked the island and there will be no school today." And you can imagine how he'd respond to that, much like you guys would. Woohoo, no school. Okay. But you must stay near home. Do you understand? I nodded, but I couldn't imagine that a shell from an enemy submarine would pick me out from all the buildings or hit me if I was standing on the famous Pontoon Bridge, or among the ships way back in the Shottegot, or along St. Anna Bay. Okay, so he's saying, and here's Pontoon, they mentioned earlier, the business district. You can see there Willemstad up here. This is where he lives, somewhere in that area. Okay, Pontoon is right here, so if there were a submarine, Pontoon would not be the place you'd want to be. So later in the morning, when she was busy making sure that all our blackout curtains were in place and filling extra pots with fresh water and checking our food supply, I stole away down to the old fort where Henry von Boven, my Dutch friend, who was also 11. I had played there many times with Henrique and other boys when we were a few years younger, imagining we were defending Willemstad against pirates or even the British. They once stormed the island, I knew, long ago. Or sometimes we'd pretend we were the Dutch going out on raids against Spanish galleons. And we know from our vocabulary, a galleon is a Spanish ship. That had happened too. It was all so real that sometimes we could see the tall masted ships coming over the horizon. You guys do the same thing. You play games, you pretend. When I was growing up, we'd play Army. We'd be out in the woods pretending that we were in the Army, you know. Use your imagination. He's the same way. So, hold on a second. Thank you. Of course, they were only the tattered-sailed native schooners from Venezuela, Aruba, or Bonaire, coming in with bananas, oranges, papayas, melons, and vegetables. When you get a chance, look at this word, schooners. But to us, they were always pirates, and we'd shout to the noisy black men aboard them. They'd laugh back and go, "Pow, pow, pow." Now, it refers to them as the noisy black men. That's not what we would say nowadays. So keep in mind the time period, pre-civil rights, and how racial tensions were. The fort looks as though it came out of storybook with gun ports along the high wall that faces the sea. For years, it guarded Willemstad, but this one morning, it did not look like a storybook fort at all. There were real soldiers with rifles, and we saw machine guns. Men with binoculars had them trained toward the Whitecaps, and everyone was tense. They chased us away, telling us to go home. Now, this word Whitecaps, that's interesting because I can tell you it does not mean that they were looking for some guys with white hats on, okay? So give that some thought and see what you think that might be, using your context clues. Okay, there, men are standing on the fort, which is at the coast, and they're looking out. So what might a whitecap be? If you can come in and tell me what a whitecap is correctly, I will give you a Starbuck. Okay. Instead, we went down to the Conaghan Emma Brugg, the famous Queen Emma Pontoon Bridge, which spans the channel that leads to the huge harbor, the Kattegat. Pontoon Bridge is a bridge that floats, so it's sitting on the water, so it floats, okay? The bridge is built on floats, context, on floats so that it can swing open as ships pass in or out, and it connects Punda with Achabanda, which means other side, the other part of the city. So we have Achabanda. You can see that here if you look over on Google Earth where the hand tool is at. Let's see. Okay, so we have Punda, and you can see right here, this is the pontoon bridge we're talking about. See, Google Earth really helps with this. Let's see what this picture's of. Maybe that'll help. Ah, nice. This is the pontoon bridge, actually. That's perfect. Okay, so it's a little walkway. So this bridge is floating, so you might get a little seasick walking on that. But it'd be really cool. And it's probably easier to build and a lot cheaper to build than a bridge that would, drawbridge that would open up and let the ships go through. So there's Achabanda. Okay. The view from there wasn't as good as from the fort, but curious people were there too, just looking. Strangely, no ships were moving in the channel. The veerboats, or the ferry boats that shuttled cars and people back and forth when the bridge was swung open, were tied up and empty. Even the native schooners were quiet against the docks inside the channel, and the black men were not laughing and shouting the way they usually did. So he can tell Philip can tell that something's different. Okay, and he's all excited about seeing the U-boats or the opportunity to maybe see one. Everybody else knows how serious it is. Henrique said, "My father told me there is nothing left of Aruba. They hit St. Nicholas, Every tanker was sunk," I said. I didn't know if that were true or not, but Henrique had an irritating way of sounding official since his father was connected with the government. So Henrique, he thinks he's something because he has some inside information nobody else knows. And of course, just like it would you guys, this irritates him. This irritates Philip. So he makes up something. Well, I know something too, even though he really didn't. So we've talked about this in class. This is that lie that Philip told. His face was round and he was chubby. His hair was straw-colored and his cheeks were always red. Henrique was very serious about everything he said or did. He looked toward Fort Amsterdam. He said, "I bet they put big guns up there now." That was a safe bet. And I said, "It won't be long until the Navy is here." Henrique looked at me. "Our Navy?" He meant the Netherlands Navy. Now keep in mind that the Netherlands has already been overtaken by Germany, so there's no way their Navy is going to come help. "No," I said, "ours," meaning the American Navy, of course. His little navy was scattered all over after the Germans took Holland. Henrique said quietly, "Our navy will come too," and I didn't want to argue with him. Everyone felt bad that Holland had been conquered by the Nazis. Remember too that the Nazis refer to the Germans under Hitler. Then an army officer climbed out of a truck and told us all to leave the Queen Emma Bridge. He was very stern. He growled, "Don't you know they could shoot a torpedo up here and kill you all?" I looked out toward the sea again. It was blue and peaceful, and a good breeze churned it up, making lines of white caps. There's that word again, white caps. So keep that in mind, guys. Oh no, you saw it. White clouds drifted slowly over it, but I couldn't see the usual parade of ships coming toward the harbor. the stubby ones or the massive ones with flags of many nations that steamed slowly up the bay to the Shottegat to load gas and oil. The sea was empty. There was not even a sail on it. So apparently, this threat was real because the shipping companies knew how dangerous it was to be out there. We suddenly became frightened and ran home to the Charleux section where we lived. So maybe we can find that Charleux. We know it's in Willemstad. And let's see, they're in Punda and they live in Willemstad, so they're running a pretty good ways. So let's go Charleux. Let's see if we can find that. If not, it's not a big deal, but it'd be neat to see where they actually live. Let's type it up here. There we go. See if it'll take us there. Haha, there we are. Charleux. Okay. So this is where Philip and his family and also Henrique's family live. So it's actually not far from there at all. And they even have the water come up in here too. So let's see. The sea was empty. There was not even a sail on it. We suddenly became frightened and ran home to the Charleux section where we lived. I guess my face was pale when I went into the house because my mother, who was in the kitchen, asked immediately, "Where have you been?" "Punda," I admitted. "I went with Henrique." Well, at least he didn't lie. He's honest, right? Yeah. My mother got very upset. She grabbed my shoulder and shook it. "I told you not to go there, Philip," she said angrily. "We are at war. Don't you understand?" "We just went to see the submarines," I said. My mother closed her eyes and pulled me up against her body. She was like that. One minute shaking me, the next holding me. I think we can probably relate to that. The radio was on, and a voice said that 56 men had died on the lake tankers that were blown up, and that the governor of Netherlands West Indies had appealed to Washington for help. There was no use in asking Amsterdam. Amsterdam is the capital of the Netherlands, and we've already discussed that they've been overrun by the Nazis. I listened to the sorrowful sound of his voice until my mother's hand switched it off. Finally, she said, "You'll be safe if you do what we tell you to do. Don't leave the yard again today." She seemed very nervous. But then she was often nervous. My mother was always afraid. Afraid I'd fall off the seawall or tumble out of a tree or cut myself with a pocket knife. Okay, some of us have mothers like that, right? They're really protective of us, which is great. Sometimes it can get annoying, but it's great. She laughed a lot and said, "Boys, boys, boys." That's Henrique's mother. She wasn't that way. Late in the afternoon, my father, whose name was also Philip Enright, returned home from the refinery where he was working on the program to increase production of aviation gas. And this word aviation is important, okay? See if you guys can figure out what that means. He'd been up since 2 o'clock, my mother said, and please don't ask him too many questions. He's been working since 2 o'clock in the morning. They had phoned him that morning to say that the Germans might attempt to shell the refinery and the oil shortage tanks, and that he must report to help fight the fires. I'd never seen him so tired, and I didn't ask as many questions as I wanted to. Now you know that Philip is probably curious and wants to know everything he can about the war, but he's trying his best not to ask his dad too many questions. Until the past year, my father and I had done a lot of things together, fishing or sailing our small boat, or taking long hikes around Krupp Bay or Surrey, or just going out into the there's a fun word, the countryside together. He knew a lot about trees and fish and birds, but now he always seemed busy. Even on a Sunday, he'd shake his head and say, "I'm sorry, guy, I have to work." After he had had his pint of cold Dutch ale, he had one every night in the living room after he got home, I asked, "Will they shoot at us tonight?" He looked at me gravely and answered, "I don't know, Philip. They might. I want you and your mother to sleep down here tonight, not on the second floor. I don't think you're in any danger, but it's better to sleep down here." "How many of them are out there?" I thought they might be like schools of fish. Dozens, maybe. I wanted to be able to tell Henrique exactly what my father knew about the submarines. He shook his head. No one knows, Philip, but there must be 3 of them around the islands. The attacks were in 3 different places. They came all the way from Germany? He nodded. Or from bases in France, he said, loading his pipe. Keep in mind that Germany had also overrun France, so they used that country as a port as well. Why can't we go out and fight them? I asked. Now, you and I know it's silly for a little island without any type of military to think of them being able to go out and fight the Germans, but Philip is a young boy, has no clue what he's talking about. My father laughed sadly and tapped his long forefinger on his chest. You'd like that, would you? But we have nothing to fight them with, son. We can't go out in motorboats and attack them with rifles. My mother came in from the kitchen to say, Stop asking so many silly questions, Philip. I told you not to do that. Father looked at her strangely. He had always answered my questions. He has the right to know. He's involved here, Grace. My mother looked back at him. Yes, unfortunately, she said. My mother, I knew, had not wanted to come to Curacao in late 1939, but my father had argued that he was needed for the war effort even though the United States was not at war then. Royal Dutch Shell had borrowed him from his American company because he was an expert in refineries and gasoline production. But the moment she saw it, my mother decided she didn't like Curacao, and she often complained about the smell of gas and oil whenever the trade winds died down. It was very different in Virginia, where my father had been in charge of building a new refinery on the banks of the Elizabeth River. We lived in a small white house on an acre of land with many trees. My mother often talked about the house and the trees, but about the change of seasons and the friends she'd had there. She said it was nice and safe in Virginia. My father would answer quietly, There's no place nice and safe right now. I remembered the summers with lightning bugs and honeysuckle smells, the cold winters when the fields would all be brown and would crackle under my feet. I didn't remember too much else. I was only 7 when we moved to the Caribbean. I guess my mother was homesick for Virginia, where no one talked Dutch and there was no smell of gas or oil, and there weren't as many black people around. Okay, that sounds bad, but remember the time period we're talking about here. Now there was a cold silence between my mother and my father. Lately, it had been happening more and more often. She went back into the kitchen. So why do you think there's a cold silence? Probably because she doesn't want to be there where they're all in danger of dying. She didn't want to be there to start with. So she's probably a little mad at Philip Sr. I said to him, Why can't they use aircraft and bomb the submarines? He was staring toward the kitchen and didn't hear me. I repeated it. He sighed. Oh yes, same answer, Philip. There are no fighting aircraft down here either. To tell you the truth, we don't have any weapons. Alright, we're going to stop right there, guys. We finished chapter 1. We've looked at several of the different places using Google Earth. So hopefully you have a better idea of what's going on, a good idea of the setting, the background, and everything else. So go ahead, take a minute to fill out your literature circle packet roles. Also, write down any questions you may have about anything we read in chapter 1. Okay. Tune in next time to chapter 2. Okay, thanks a lot, guys.